No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason Heal. I'm the Communications Manager at Maxim Institute, and this is our weekly short-form podcast. These podcasts are released in tandem with our weekly column and are a chance for you to hear in-depth from the column's author about some of the thinking that went into producing their final piece. Today, we talk to Maxim senior researcher Marcus Roberts about his recent column. Marcus, welcome along to the podcast. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be here.
We're talking about your latest column, Bonfires, U-turns, or responding to events. And you're obviously referencing the two policy bonfires that our new Prime Minister has lit in the last little while. Do you expect there to be any more of these? And maybe if there was, what could be on the pyre?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jason. I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is there anything left to burn?
Yeah, that's right.
They've gone through all the old junk in the attic and they've burnt it all. I don't know what else there is. But I think...
Because that's kind of what the point of these things was, right? To just jettison unpopular policy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That you had a new Prime Minister. And remember, he is still... Chris Hipkins is still a new Prime Minister. It feels like he's been in the job for quite a while, but it's only 3 months now. Yeah. A lot of things have happened, including these bonfires. And this was part of it, was to set a new direction. That Labour was, the polls were against Labour. It was very high likelihood they were going to lose. New face, new Prime Minister, that's one aspect of it, but also a new stamp on the party's policies. And in particular, these things that are were perceived to be unpopular. And so I think that the last big thing that they could and probably will get rid of or dilute in some way is the three waters, which we haven't heard much about recently, but is the big thing that I think Labour would feel that they are vulnerable on.
Well, interesting that the word bonfire was coined by the media and not really by any politicians. And it has this kind of permanent sound to it, like you put something on the bonfire and it burns up and it's
not
gone.
Coming back, right?
Yeah, that's right. But how permanent is it, do you think? I mean, the government obviously thought that these were good policies when they initially proposed them. So are they actually burnt them, or have they put them on the shelf to take down at a later date?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the option that what you proposed originally, you can bring it back out again, right? Like, there's nothing permanent about saying we're not going to do this.
Yes.
And in fact, a couple of things the Prime Minister has made clear will be on the table in some way, shape or form on the election trail. So the example is one of the insurance schemes, the income insurance scheme. He said there'd be something like that on the election trail, which is great. You know, you've got an unpopular policy, take it to the voters, explain to the voters why it's a good idea, why you think it's a good idea, why New Zealand needs it. And then if you win the election, you can say, well, I've got a mandate for that.
Yes. Because you campaigned on that issue, rather than focus grouping and polling and going, this is what people don't want, so I'm just going to respond to that. Yeah,
or even worse, here's something that I haven't mentioned at all on the campaign trail.
Yes.
Now I've got into government, I'm going to surprise people. I think a lot of people don't like that. So the things around three waters, for example, the broader questions around co-governance, whether or not that's an accurate term to use. Part of the problem was that there's a suspicion that this was sprung on people.
Yes.
That they weren't open during the election. Because remember 2020, which delivered an unprecedented majority in an MMP election to the government without needing the Greens or the Māori Party. That was a COVID election.
Yeah, it was a referendum on how well the government responded to that.
Yes, and not wanting to rock the boat halfway through a crisis.
Yeah, and so it wasn't really as much as the government might say it has a mandate. It wasn't really, because they didn't really campaign on anything other than, look how great we did handling COVID. Exactly. So that's kind of a cynical take on it, isn't it? Is that this is pragmatic response to unpopular polls just to win an election.
Yes.
What would be a courageous or maybe a charitable take on this?
So the charitable take is that things have changed.
Yeah.
That what do you expect me to do when the circumstances have changed?
Yeah.
Yes, income insurance scheme, biofuels mandate, clean car upgrade scheme, these are all good ideas, and they are still good ideas, but at the moment we have to prioritise other things. And we're not prioritising other things because there's an election in 6 months. We're prioritising other things because we've had a cyclone, we've had flooding in Auckland, and we've got inflation at the highest level it's been for 3 decades.
Yeah.
So under those circumstances, of course we're going to focus on other things.
Yeah.
You can always question that, because how much of government resource and time was spent on these things? Is it really going to be diverted into helping people get their lives back in Hawke's Bay or West Auckland? But at least it gives a perception of that. We're focusing on other things.
Yeah. Which again is kind of a cynical.
Yeah, I did get back to the cynical view. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. But in lighting these bonfires, though, there is now an opportunity to have more of an open discussion, debate of ideas around the election, and it gives an opportunity for the opposition to step up in a way.
I think that's right, Jace. I think that this is an opportunity not only for Labour to take things to the electorate and say, look, we want to do these things, please vote for us for these reasons. But I think it also forces the opposition to be more clear about why people should vote for them. That prior to these bonfires, I think there was an expectation from the opposition, particularly the National Party, that Labour was going to lose it due to these unpopular policies, potentially also to an unpopular leader. They've got rid of an unpopular leader, they've got rid of many of these unpopular policies. The negative reasons, or the reasons to vote against the government, have been reduced, which I think was a large part of this. So that therefore puts the onus back onto the opposition. Why should we vote for you?
Yeah.
What are you going to do about inflation? What are you going to do about education, about crime? Now that's to a point, because I still think governments lose elections rather than oppositions winning.
Yes.
But if they open the space for the opposition to be forced to step up and say, well, this is what we're going to do about it, then that, I think, is all for the benefit of our democracy. And it's not just a challenge to the opposition, but that's an opportunity.
Yeah.
I think we've already seen it with the education policy National brought out last week. That set the agenda for the week. People came out and opposed it, but also a lot of people supported it. But at least you said, okay, well, actually National's standing for something.
We're debating a policy rather than some sensational thing.
Or whether we just don't like the government.
Yeah.
We're sick of it.
Yeah.
I think there's too much of that we get sick of a government and vote them out, rather than thinking, well, even though they've been in for a while, do we still prefer what they're doing to what the opposition proposes?
Yeah. So we might be in for an interesting election this year.
Oh, they're always interesting.
Well, Marcus, thanks for being with us today.
No problem, mate. Thanks.
Now let's hear from Marcus as he reads his column.
Chris Hipkins has been Prime Minister for only 2 months. In that time, he has already undertaken 2 policy bonfires. Back in February, Hipkins scrapped the proposed merger of RNZ and TVNZ. He pushed the compulsory income insurance scheme off, at least until the election. He withdrew the religious hate speech legislation, passing that issue to the Law Commission, and he ditched the biofuels mandate. The second policy pyre was lit last week, when the Prime Minister announced the government would not introduce legislation to lower the voting age to 16 for general elections. They scrapped the clean car upgrade scheme and the social leasing car scheme, and they focused public transport improvements on the 5 major population centres only. Although a policy bonfire sounds permanent, it might be more accurate to say that at least some of these policies have been spared the fire and have instead been put in the government's deep freeze to be thawed out at a later, more politically convenient date. Either way, the question arises, why has the government decided that so many of its projects should not be pursued now? Presumably, these policies were considered good ideas when they were proposed, so why eliminate them? A critical eye could discern this government was running scared of the unpopularity of its ideological policy desires during an election year. Thus, these announcements are just cynical ploys to garner enough votes to be re-elected, after which everything thrown on the bonfire will be up for grabs again. The government is simply trying to appease the focus group-driven whims of the electorate rather than trying to lead by standing up for the policies that it believes in. A more charitable reading would explain these U-turns as prudent responses to the most significant challenge a government can face. Events, dear boy, events, at least according to former British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. Is it any surprise that the government has reprioritised its spending and policy focus when food price inflation is the highest it has been in 33 years, and when recent flooding and cyclones have caused billions of dollars of damage and wrecked communities? Furthermore, shouldn't we be happy when a government listens to the people and drops genuinely unpopular policies? Isn't that called representative democracy? Ah yes, says the critic. It's called representative democracy. Our politicians are elected to lead us and not merely to be a mirror of the aggregate of the electorate's inconsistent, poorly informed views. But, says the more charitable viewer, the government now has more money to spend on bread and butter issues, like increasing payments for superannuation, benefits and student allowances. That's clearly good election year politics, and now it also has more resources and time to devote to bedding down its more significant reforms, like Te Whatu Ora and Te Pukenga. It wouldn't need those time and resources if it wasn't hell-bent on breaking pre-existing institutions and remaking them into something worse. Thankfully, it's less than 7 months until Election Day.
Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā, goodbye for now.